Hello, my name is David Hicks. Thank you so much for tuning into this video where we're going to talk about, was Jesus God's son? Was he the Messiah? Meaning, was he the Christ? Meaning what? Meaning, was he the anointed one? Meaning what? Well, when you read the Bible, the anointed one, and people were anointed with oil in Old Testament times, in olden days, when they were appointed to be priest or king, things of that nature, very special, important positions in leading the people, in serving the Lord. And so in the Bible, in the writings that were in place before the days of Jesus, it talks about an anointed one. And it talks about how this anointed one is a king. And this king is God's son. And how the nations, the kings of the earth, rose up against God and against his anointed one. And throughout the scriptures, you see hints, you see prophecies about God, about how God was going to send this anointed one, this king, his son, to his people. And so in the days of Jesus, people are often wondering, well, is he the Christ? Is he the Messiah? Is he the Son of God? Is he the King? So you see these questions over and over. And so that's why we've studied them together. And so who even claimed, that Jesus was God's son? Well, as we've seen throughout the series, God himself claimed, at least if you believe the writings of the Bible, God himself claimed that Jesus was his son when he said, "This is my beloved son in whom I'm well pleased. This is my son. Listen to him." On more than one occasion, God testified that Jesus was his son. Jesus claimed to be God's son. Angels said he was God's son. Demons said he was God's son. And then you get all sorts of people who gave eyewitness testimony, all right, as part of the evidence for Jesus, the eyewitness testimony they gave. You've got Peter and John, who were fishermen, and yet they were called by Jesus to follow him. They left everything to follow him. They became his apostles. Jesus chose 12. Jesus chose 12 to be his apostles, his special messengers. They were two of them, and they testified later on in their writings how they saw Jesus and they heard Jesus and they talked with Jesus and they touched Jesus. And John wrote an entire gospel, an entire booklet, if you will, about the life of Jesus, the Gospel of John, in the hopes that we would come to the same conclusion that he came to, that we would believe that Jesus was the Christ, the Son of God. So they gave testimony. Saul, later known as Paul, used to persecute followers of Christ, was going to a city to arrest Christians, drag them back to Jerusalem to be put on trial, maybe even be put to death there. And yet on his way, he saw Jesus. He saw the risen Jesus. And he forever changed. He became, like I said, known as Paul later on. And he suffered more than anybody I know of for preaching Jesus. Stephen, maybe we talked about him. It's hard for me to remember. He was the first martyr. He was the first person we know of that was put to death for preaching Jesus as being the Christ, the Messiah. Stoned him. Why would you claim that Jesus was God's son if it's going to get you stoned? If it's a con, if Jesus was a made-up person, why in the world would you do that? And he and so many others have given credence to the idea that Jesus truly was God's son by the lengths and the extent to which they were willing to suffer and die for him. That's part of the evidence. What other evidence is there? We looked at prophecy, the writings that were in place in Jesus' day. They'd been written hundreds of years earlier. Various and sundry prophets, right, and various and sundry things about Jesus, detailing such things as his death and the events surrounding it. We looked specifically and this 22nd Psalm, Isaiah 53, both of which give remarkable details about the death of Jesus. They pierced his hands and his feet. That was written long before the practice of crucifixion. There are, the miracles that Jesus did. And the crazy thing about it is, the people who orchestrated his death didn't even deny that he did miracles. There was one time in the Gospel of John that I mentioned earlier, where they picked up stones to stone Jesus. And Jesus asked, for which work are you going to stone me for? And they told him, we're not stoning you for a good work. We're stoning you because you, being a man, claimed to be God. Because when he claimed to be the Son of God, that made him equal with God. And so, yeah, even the people who didn't believe in him testified that Jesus claimed to be God's Son and that he did miracles. They just didn't, go make the logical faith leap from miracles to him being God's Son for whatever reason. Seeing is believing. It's not necessarily trusting. That's a side lesson. His ministry, his character. You look at the heart of Jesus. He wasn't, going. He was basically during his ministry years living the life of a homeless Hollywood star. I mean, every day he was hounded from people on all sides, and yet he didn't even have a place to lay his head, as he testified to somebody who wanted to follow him. And so he wasn't getting rich off all this, but he was healing the sick, raising the dead, casting out demons, doing all sorts of jaw-dropping miracles. And so, but more than that, he demonstrated the kind of heart that you would think someone who claims to value love more than anything else would show. He chose people that others would just overlook to be his closest followers. He sat down and ate with tax collectors, with prostitutes, with others who were labeled as sinners, with people whom the self-righteous religious leaders of Jesus' day would not touch, would not have anything to do with. He reached out and touched those that others wouldn't. The leper. And by touching, made him clean. He forgave sins. He took up children in his arms and prayed blessings over them. Just look at his heart. And he lambasted hypocritical religious leaders. He stood hard against them at the cost of his own life, because they were the ones who ultimately plotted and orchestrated his death. And so you look at his heart, and it speaks for itself. It's evidence for itself, that he was God's Son. And even last time, in our last video, we saw outside references to Jesus from his, outside of the Bible, not in the Bible. Rise of Josephus, Tacitus. There are lots of others out there, but there are two notable historians who reference Jesus. And so if Jesus never existed, how in the world does that happen? Especially since they lived, let's see, Josephus was born 3 years after Jesus was born. But if, Jesus never lived, why in the world is Josephus writing about him? So it's not like it had been thousands of years when these historians were writing what they did about Jesus. So there is tons of evidence out there. And toward that end, I add my own little evidence. Okay? Why do I believe it? Well, first of all, I do believe that there is a God. Okay? I can't, look, I'm a programmer. I don't know how you can be a programmer, a coder, and be an atheist at the same time. because the most amazing, jaw-dropping code in the known universe is DNA. And if you believe that it is by the evolution that all life came to be, what you are ultimately saying is that this, amazing, jaw-dropping, mind-staggering biological code, DNA and RNA, came about by accident, and it coded itself by accident. And I just can't fathom that. As a programmer, I know any programmer can tell you one little mistake, one little typo in your code can cause your entire program to crash, or at least wreak havoc with it to where it's extremely slow or gives all sorts of weird numbers, and or whatever job you've designed it to do. One little mistake can mess up the whole thing. That's what mutations are. And so when people say it is by mutations that in the code that life evolved and came about, what they're literally saying is because of mistakes in the biological code that life came to be. So because there can't be intelligent design behind it, because once there is, there's God. So all the biological code used to make, the human eye came about by accident. And not only the code that makes an eye came about by accident, the code that says, hey, you need to put the eyes here and not here on the bottom of the feet, that came by accident as well. Think about it this way. Every time, for every male and female species, how did male and female get started in the first place? How did life come from non-life? Well, it was a simple cell. Okay, can you describe this simple cell to me? That's easy to say. It was a simple cell. All right, I need some details, because from what I know, that even one-celled organisms are extremely complex. But yes, you have, and for every male and female species that's ever existed, not only do you have to accidentally come up with a code for the male, at the exact same time you have to come up with the code for the female. How is that possible? If there is no intelligence guiding the coding. When I'm asked to write a program, I can't sit down and just blindly type the keyboard and hope it comes out okay. So yes, I see creation, I see us, and I know there's a God. And then when I see all this stuff I've talked about regarding Jesus, and then when I look at my own life, I'm convinced that the God that is out there that exists is the God of Jesus Christ, that Jesus truly was his son. I was adopted, okay? I did meet my birth mother, and I did hear part of my birth story. And one of the things she said is that once her parents found out that she was pregnant and they were taking her to the hospital, she was walking behind them as they crossed the street, and she overheard them say, well, it's too late to get an abortion. Now, this was 1970. And, back then, abortion was illegal. It was still happening. That's the sad thing about reality. You can make anything illegal, it'll still happen. That's not to say that the law shouldn't be there, okay? We can't just legalize everything because, I'm getting off on a political tangent here, but it's just reality. People will always break laws, sadly enough, but they still help. Anyway, so yes, if what they were saying was, if we had caught this earlier, we could have aborted him. And so this video you're seeing right now, this person you're seeing right now, never would have seen the light of day. Never would have taken a breath. So I was saved from abortion. Believe that with all my heart. Raised in a small town in Rockwood, Tennessee. I'm a guy from nowhere here. I'd say about Rockwood this much. There is indeed a rock and a piece of wood, and that's about it. So I'm a nobody from nowhere. And yet, God has guided me all my life to lead me to get to do some incredible things, like the story of how I got involved in inner city ministry. I was going to a Christian camp, and this guy came from Lipscomb University. It's a Christian university in Nashville, and he gave a spiel for why you should go to a Christian university. I was sold. Decided to go to Lipscomb. Went to Lipscomb freshman year. Freshmen are the last people to be able to sign up for classes. And so I was meticulous in plotting out my entire, I'm serious, I plotted out every course I was going to take freshman through senior. And I had heard about, sometimes as a freshman, you can't get into certain classes because there's too many people that's already signed up for them. And so I had a couple of backup plans in place in case my first choices for classes didn't work out. So I finally, we're this huge long line, get there, and it's time to register for classes. So plan A, no, a lot of classes booked. Plan B, nope, that didn't work either. Plan C, no. And so now I'm just like, oh great. Now, so okay, what's there that I can take? Well, I had to take a speech class. Okay, hadn't planned to. All right, I'll take a speech class. Who's going to teach it? Some guy I never heard of. All right, okay, great. Give me a speech class. Show up the first day. We're sorry. The person who was going to teach this class can't do it, and so he's been replaced by a guy named Carol Ellis. Okay, Carol Ellis. Now I'm preaching my class. Teaching my class. Okay, what is that? What does that have anything to do with anything? So during that speech class, I gave a few religious talks. And afterwards, Carol Ellis, who happened to be a preacher at a church in town, called me up and said, "Hey, David, I was impressed with some of the things you had to say. Would you consider being a youth minister for our church? Small church, we don't have many youth, but we'd love to have somebody work with them. Would you consider doing it?" Okay, prayed about it, decided, okay, I'm going to do it. So I became a youth minister at this church. That in itself, lots of God's providence there. About 2 years later, junior year now that I think of, I was needing to study, and so I decided had been going to the church building. It was the Carrollton Avenue Church of Christ. Went to the church building in order to do some studying. I get there, and there's this bus outside the church building. And I'm thinking, what in the world is this? And so I look inside the bus. It says Nashville Inner City Ministry. Go inside. And there's a bunch of Christians teaching and sharing food and drink with kids from the inner city. I'd been there 2 years. Nobody even told me we were doing this. And so I saw what they were doing, and I was like, wow, this is incredible. And began thinking about it, and God worked in my heart, and I started volunteering for them, and one thing led to another, and long story short, by the time I graduated, I committed 2 years of my life to do inner city work in Chattanooga. I mean, it's just because of a class I never intended to take, taught by a teacher that wasn't supposed to teach it, and because I accidentally happened to be at the church building when this ministry was going on. 2 years later, I ended up doing inner city ministry not just for 2 years, for 5 years. So it's stories like that. And it's stories about, I wasn't supposed to take this road at this time, and all of a sudden there's a stranger who desperately needs help. How did I end up here at this time? To be able to help this person. It's stories like this. During the time that I was doing inner city ministry, there was a kid named Alvin Belcher. It was his birthday. His family wasn't doing anything for him for his birthday. My wife and I another providential story that I don't have time to share involved around inner city ministry. Just making sure I'm not being too winded here. We didn't have enough money to do anything for him. We had about $3 or $4 in the bank. You can't even get that. You couldn't even at that time get it out at an ATM, and it was the weekend. The banks were closed. We had nothing to do, nothing that we could do to help him celebrate his birthday. I walked outside of my house, can't even remember why. And there on the steps leading up to our front door was a $20 bill. I looked right. I looked left. There's nobody anywhere. There's nobody to even ask, is this your $20 bill? And so we were able to take that $20 bill and take Alvin out to dinner for his birthday. If God isn't real, and if Jesus wasn't his son, the Jesus I'm trying to follow wasn't his son, how do you explain that? How do you explain the check that comes out of nowhere when you can't, there's no way for you to pay your bills? And all the other stories of God's providence that have kept going on and on in my life. I can't explain life any other way. And so, because of my wife that I met one night when I was, again, in a place I wasn't supposed to be, at a time I wasn't supposed to be there, whom I met at that time, didn't realize she was going to be my wife. Ended up in Africa. Did 5 years of work there. And from Africa, it's been here, there, a little bit everywhere. I've always felt God watching over me and helping me. I'm absolutely convinced that he's real, Jesus' son is real, and that's why I'm doing these videos. Because I'm hoping you'll be able to see it and come to the same conclusion. Why does this even matter? Why does it matter? Because the Bible says this. Acts chapter 4, verse 12. This was said by the aforementioned Peter and John, who spent the remaining years of Jesus' life with Jesus, saw him ascend to heaven, was commanded by him to go out and preach. And they did. And they were here they had done a miracle that the self-righteous religious leaders were upset about, because they had been doing it in Jesus' name. They couldn't deny they had done a miracle. They had healed a man who was lame from birth. And so, as they're talking to Peter John said this, in reference to Jesus: there is no other name under heaven given to men by which we must be saved. There's no other name. Not Muhammad, not Buddha, not Confucius, not any other name. Whatever you think of these people, good or bad, there's no other name under heaven given among men by which we must be saved. We must put our faith in Jesus. They were willing to get beat for that statement. They were willing to die for that statement. And I would hope, don't know if this will ever happen, but I'd hope I'd be willing to do the same. And I hope you'd come to know Jesus and God to such a level and have such a deep, loving relationship with him that you'd be willing to do it too. If you're not convinced yet, keep researching it. Pray to God. Ask God, please, God, if you truly are there, and if Jesus truly is your son, help me see it. And just listen. Keep your eyes open. He has ways of answering that prayer. Absolutely. Thank you for watching this video. Thank you for watching this series. I am not worthy, for you to watch this, but thank you. God bless you. God bless this recording. Hang in there.